All right. Well, Eva, thank you so much for hopping on today. I'm super excited to talk with you on the podcast today all about sleep because I know it is a vital importance to most of us moms. And when we have babies or toddlers or elementary school age kids who are not sleeping, it can really put a toll on us. So I'm excited to chat with you about how we can get our kids to sleep.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you got started in this world of helping other moms get their kids to sleep.
Yeah, so I'm a mom of 3 and, I'm a wife and married as well. We celebrated our 12th wedding anniversary, just a couple months ago, and I live in Toronto
Congrats.
with my 3
Yeah.
kids. My kids are 9, 7, and 2, and I got into this business because of my middle child. So what happened was, I'm actually a lawyer by training, so I know it's like quite the pivot here, and so I finished law school. I gave birth to my first kid, who was what I like to call my unicorn baby. And maybe some of you can relate to this, where she was literally that baby that just made me look like the best mom in the entire world because she was so happy, so easy, made me look like mother of the universe. Ate when she ate when she needed to eat, she slept when she needed to sleep, and the end result was she was a fantastic sleeper, and I didn't have to open up a single book to
Yeah.
figure out, how to fix anything because there was nothing to fix. And so 2 years and 4 months later, her younger sister was born, and that baby was a very different experience. And I even remember being in the recovery room, like in after having her, and I remember holding her and going and thinking to myself, I th- this is different. This is going to be different. She was a high needs baby who cried way more frequently than her older sister did. She would go from 0 to 10 at the drop of a hat. When she was upset, the neighbors down the road knew what was happening. She was being held literally 24/7, and naturally she was not sleeping.
Yeah.
And by the time she was 4 months of age, she was literally waking me every 90 minutes all night long. And I thought I was going to die. Literally thought I felt like I got hit by a Mack truck day in and day out. And it was horrible.
Mhm.
It was an absolute bloody nightmare. It's not something that I would wish upon anyone. I ran to my doctor because I thought I barely recognized myself. Is
Yeah.
this postpartum depression? Do I have it? Because I was depressed. I was anxious. I barely recognized myself. And I knew that there was something really, really wrong. And so thankfully, my doctor is fantastic. And he looks at my health history and he sees that I actually don't have a history of clinical depression or anxiety. And so he asked me, he said, are you sleeping? And I was like, no. What is this sleep thing that you talk about? My kid's waking me every 90 minutes. And he's like, listen, go get your baby sleeping. There are people that can help you. There's lots of, books and resources and help. Like you can get this all fixed. And then he goes, you need to get yourself sleeping, and then let's reassess afterwards. Let's, check back in, see how you're feeling, and then we can reassess from there and see what kind of help you need. And to make a very long story short, thankfully I didn't need any more intervention. I just needed sleep. That
Yeah.
was it. And then when I finally started getting a proper night's sleep, I felt like a new human.
Yeah.
I also barely recognized myself, but in the best way possible, because suddenly I was waking up feeling refreshed. Suddenly I wasn't biting my husband's head off and fighting with him over absolutely nothing at the drop of a hat. Suddenly, I wasn't trying to keep my cool around my toddler. Suddenly I was able to be the mom that I wanted to be,
Mhm.
because when I was exhausted and cranky and miserable and losing it at my toddler and not enjoying the time that I had with my infant, I wasn't the mom that I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And so being able to get that sleep was an absolute game changer for me. And so that was kind of what inspired me to say, hey, you know what? Why don't I use up the rest of my maternity leave to get my certification to become a sleep consultant? So, I don't mean to rub it into any of your American listeners here, but in Canada, we have 12 months of maternity leave. In fact, we actually now have there is an option to take 18 months off if you want. But at that point, it was 12 months. And so I took the 12 months. And so I had about 6, 7 months left to be able to get that certification and launch what was just supposed to be a side business. And
Yeah.
I went back to work part time. The side business grew. And to make a very long story short, I took a risk. I chose my business, when the business kept growing, and I haven't looked back. And so here I am. I have been helping thousands of exhausted moms get their little ones consistently sleeping 11 to 12 hours at night so they can be functioning humans again.
And it is so needed. And I remember talking to somebody, I can't remember who it was, but I was like recounting the story of, my first child when she was waking me up in the middle of the night, and she was actually decent, I think, sleeping at night. It was just not wanting to fall asleep. And so, but I can remember that sense of lack of sleep, right? And I remember waking up one night and feeling a lump at the end of the bed and panicking, thinking that it was her, that I'd like fallen asleep while I was nursing her in bed and that she'd slidden down into the bottom of my bed. And I woke up in such a panic, and it was just the dog. But it was that like hallucination sort of feeling, like you were just so sleep deprived that your mind starts playing tricks on you, and you're like hallucinating that it's her at the end of the bed. And it's amazing how much that lack of sleep, people don't they under we I think we underestimate what a lack of sleep really does to our mental capacity, and
Mhm.
not just our physical energy, but like that mental piece that it really does on us, and how much helping them sleep changes for them, like, right?
Mhm.
And changes for us. Like a big part of what I educate so many of my clients at work with, like our NICU babies, is parents will come in and they want to hold their baby every time they come in. I'm like, I totally want you to hold your baby, but that sleep is vital for their neurodevelopment. And so, like,
Yeah.
let them stay sleeping. When it's time to wake them up to feed, then you can pick them up and hold them and whatever. And it's so hard for that. But that sleep is so, so, so important. So,
Yes.
I know this is going to be probably one of the biggest questions that people are going to ask, because this idea of sleep training automatically goes to the cry it out strategy. Like, it's
Right.
kind of like when we think like getting my kid to sleep, that's like the number one method that people kind of go to. Is that the only way, or are there other strategies? Like, if we're not wanting to do that, talk to us all about that.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And I'm so happy that I'm able to delve into this because it really is completely false that cry it out is the only option here. So let's just kind of take a step back here. So cry it out, let's talk about what that is, right? So cry it
Yeah.
out, which is also known as extinction, is basically a pretty cold turkey way to teach a baby or toddler how to sleep independently. And so what that basically looks like is you place your little one, into their crib or bed, say goodnight, leave the room, and don't go back in. And for a lot of people, that is totally outside their comfort zone. And I think that that's a very human way to feel about something as cold turkey as cry it out. If that's outside your comfort zone, I don't blame you. With my kids, it was outside of my comfort zone as well. And so I want to assure you that there are other approaches that you can take that will still be as effective, that will still be able to teach your little one how to fall asleep by themselves and how to connect their sleep cycles so that they're not waking up repeatedly at night, but can still allow you to be there in a supportive manner, whether you are there with your child the entire time, sitting next to them, supporting them, whether or not you're checking and consoling on them at every few minutes. It doesn't need to involve leaving them and not coming in. So that's the first thing that I want to emphasize. The second thing that I want to emphasize is that before we ever dive into any kind of sleep training, we need to make sure that we're actually setting your little one up for success by addressing those preliminary steps first. A lot of people don't even know how important this is. They don't even know that this is a thing. They just think that, oh, my little one isn't sleeping. So, all right, I got to go sleep train. Sleep training, the way that I just described, teaching your little one how to sleep is part of your plan, but it's not going to work if you haven't done that preliminary work. In other words, what does your little one's sleep environment look like? What kind of schedule do they have? Is it the correct schedule? Right? It's not just a matter of having them on a schedule. It needs to be a biologically appropriate schedule so that they're not getting overtired, because overtired babies are not sleep trainable. They're not, it's bound to fail even before it begins. What kind of routines do your little one have? What does daytime nutrition look like? What does emotional well being look like? So, for example, if your little one's bed sharing with you and you want to get them sleeping in their crib, in their own room, you're not going to want to do that in a cold turkey manner. You're going to want to transition them to their room, in steps, so that it's not this cold turkey situation for everyone that can often end up backfiring. So when you've completed those preliminary steps first, and then you move on to a sleep training strategy that you feel comfortable with, and you're setting your little one up for success, it tends to go a lot more smoothly than you would imagine. So these horror stories about hearing hours and hours of crying really shouldn't happen, because that tells me that there is something off with whatever plan. Maybe there was something in that preliminary work that wasn't done to begin with. Maybe what you're doing isn't being done consistently or correctly, but either way, it should never, ever involve hours of crying, like at one time, at whatsoever. So I hope that reassures people that if you are bone tired and you don't want to live this way anymore and you want to change the situation, but you think that the only way to change it is by leaving your little one to cry for hours on end, it's not the case. Mm. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks. I was muted because the doorbell rang and then my dog was barking.
Okay.
But that was one of the things for me. I remember with one of my babies, I don't remember which one, but I remember trying the cry it out sort of strategy and being outside and just like, I cannot do this. Like it was so anxiety, right? Like I had so much anxiety being in the other room listening to her cry that it wasn't peaceful or helpful, or like I was like, I don't even care if she is awake all night. I cannot sit there with that anxiety of just hearing her scream in the other room. And we tried it for a short period of time and I was like, can't do this. And so, I feel like we went about it our own method and our own strategy, whether it was perfect or not at the time, it worked for us. But at the time, like looking back, it would have been helpful to have some of these tools and strategies, right? So
Mhm.
are there just some babies that won't sleep?
No. Healthy babies? No. So let me elaborate on that, right? Are there babies that are naturally better at sleeping than others? Yes. No different than asking, are there some children who are naturally better at learning how to swim than
Mhm.
others? Yes, there are, right? Swimming is a skill that comes more naturally to some kids than it does to others. And I'll tell you why I love this analogy. I love this analogy because I have a first cousin who I'm very, very close with. She's just a few months younger than me. And we grew up together. And she was swimming independently by the time she was 2 or 3 years old. And I know this because our families belonged to like the same health club in the summertime. And so we would go, every weekend we would go swimming together. And so she was swimming, swimming, swimming. And I was in my neon orange water wings until I was literally 7 years old. And it was at that point where my mom was just like, okay, this is getting absurd. My mom was very much the type where she was like, no, when Eva's ready, she's ready and I don't want to push her. And then the problem is that when you're really stubborn like me and you get comfortable in your water wings, then you're not going to learn how to swim. And so swimming was obviously something that did not come naturally to me either. You know what it was? I just got comfortable. I got
Mhm.
comfortable in my water wings. I didn't really care that my cousin Michelle was swimming up and down the deep end, no problem. Like, I never really cared. I never really had that type of, FOMO. And so my mom got me into private swimming lessons. And off came the water wings. And, I don't know, it was like literally 2 lessons and I was swimming because I was already 7 years old. I was very buoyant.
Yeah.
It was not difficult to teach me. And then by the time I was 16 years old, I was a swim instructor, I was a lifeguard, and I was on my high school swim team. So this whole notion of like, well, if it doesn't come naturally, then it means that you're not good at it is
Mm,
bogus. It's a skill that you can learn and you
yeah.
can be taught, right? And with sleeping, it is no different. There are absolutely kids that are not naturally great at sleeping, but they can learn. It just means it's not coming naturally. It just means that when they're overtired and they go to bed too late, they're going to give you a crappy night. Whereas, the unicorn babies, i.e., my older daughter, I didn't really have her on much of a schedule, or looking back, it wasn't a great one, but it was good enough.
Yeah.
Because for the unicorn babies, those babies that are just naturally amazing at sleeping, good enough is good enough. But for my middle child, good enough was not nearly good enough. It needed
Hmm.
to be, more, everything needed to be more properly in place. But then you know what happens? By the time she was 6 months of age and I knew what I was doing, because she was such a terrible sleeper, I had no choice but to figure out what to do. She was sleeping better than my older daughter was at 6 months. She was out sleeping her, when I
Yeah.
would compare each of their sleep patterns at 6 months. And so don't underestimate what your little one can do. Your friends and family members might have the best of intentions by saying, oh, all right, I guess you don't have a sleeper. Yeah, you weren't a sleeper either. So I guess little Johnny's taking after you. Don't get me wrong, they have the best of intentions there, but it's actually incorrect what they're telling you. It just means that they need to be taught and then they can learn. And
Yeah.
then that's when it's like such a game changer. I mean, my middle child, especially when given that she was such a high needs baby, it just meant that when she was sleeping terribly, she was so cranky during the day and so
Hmm.
needy and so clingy and just very, very, very high needs. And then when I finally got her sleeping consistently through the night like a champ, it's not that her temperament changed and she became a different baby. She was still who she is, but the intensity of that
Hmm.
neediness dropped dramatically,
Hmm.
noticeably. And I can't tell you how often people tell me that, because I get a lot of people reaching out with babies that fit that high needs criteria. They're clingier, they go from 0 to 10, they don't adapt to changes easily. There's like a whole list. If you Google characteristics of high needs babies, you can see, and a
Yeah.
lot of you might be going like, check mark, check mark, check mark, yeah, baby absolutely fits that criteria. And so it's not like that completely changes, but rather the intensity of it goes down so much more that all of a sudden I remember going, oh my gosh, she's 5 months old and she's been playing around with her toys by herself for like 7 minutes and
Yeah.
hasn't had a meltdown and hasn't cried for me. And I remember going like, oh my gosh, I'm not used to this. I'm not used to being able to leave her on her play mat, go to the bathroom and make myself lunch all at once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So don't underestimate what your little one can do.
Yeah, and this is like so powerful for me too. Even thinking like, I mean, I work with a lot of these really high needs babies, right? When they're in the NICU. And so you're working with them after the fact. But I think oftentimes some of that high needs sort of status can be confounding and what is it? It's the word. It's making it hard for people to see maybe underlying things that are going on too. And so
Mhm.
I think this sleep and like helping tackle sleep is a really great first step to really help identify like if there's reflux or all of these other little layers that might be bothering your child, and just super helpful. But that, like, if you're not sleeping, like nobody's happy and they're not
Yeah.
happy and they're not feeling good. And it can be incredible to get them to sleep. And so, I am sitting there thinking like, okay, well, I don't have babies anymore. Right? But my girls are not the best of sleepers. My son and is the greatest sleeper. And even like there's two questions. So I have that. I'll go follow that question up in a second. The one that came to mind was, so you have a family that has multiple kids, right? So
Mhm.
you have an infant, but yet you have kids that you have to get to school and things like that, like how do you navigate really establishing a really great sleep schedule when you have a life, right?
Yeah. No, it's a really good question, and I think the most important thing I would say is to take your little one's schedule into account when making those calculations and figuring it out, because it's very common for people to tell me, oh, well, the baby just has to learn to go with the flow because Johnny has karate and, Jessica has swimming and there's nothing I can do about it. And so the baby just has to nap on the go and go with the flow because, she's the youngest.
Mhm.
And I don't see it that way, right? It doesn't mean that karate and swimming aren't important, but it means that they're just as important as the sleep schedule is. And so I mean, listen, I've got 3 kids myself, right? And when I will fully admit that it's been a little while before I've actually had to deal with, those schedules because we're still in a pandemic here in Toronto as we are recording this. But I'm gonna pretend I'm gonna put myself into like a twilight zone in like an era where there's no COVID, and I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. Really, what it comes down to is looking at the schedule. So, okay, for example, my girls love art, right? And I had them signed up for, art classes, in-person art classes, right before the lockdown began. And so if I'm figuring out, okay, when do I want to sign them up for art, knowing that my 2-year-old naps around 1 or 1:30 in the afternoon, then, and knowing that my husband isn't necessarily around all the time, in the mornings. So I'm going to make sure that I sign them up for a class in the morning so
Mhm.
that my 2-year-old isn't stuck taking a crappy nap in the stroller, for 30 minutes. He can take a proper nap in his crib at home, for 2 hours, and my girls can have, their art classes as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the most important thing, is that nobody is saying, "Oh, you have a baby on a schedule, so now you can't have a life." It's a matter of saying, "Okay, the baby on the schedule is part of your life. And so let's figure out, how we can actually make this work."
Yeah.
And, sometimes I will tell you, sometimes it might involve, I happen to have my parents that live very close by. And so I do have the luxury of being able to call on them if needed. Now, again, my husband has been working from home since March of 2020. And so again, it just hasn't been, relevant. But if he was, let's say we're in like a non-COVID world right now where he's back in his office and the baby is sleeping and I have to go pick up the kids from the bus, I wouldn't have any qualms either working at a carpool so I don't have to, wake my kid up early all the time, or
Mhm.
call on, family members to come and help and, or stay around, or like figure out something. Is there an older kid that can take my younger ones home so they can walk home from the bus together? You know what I mean? Where
Yeah.
you want to think in terms of like problem solving strategies, as opposed to just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, "Oh, there's no point. I've got older ones. Why bother?"
Yeah.
Because usually, if you want to find a solution, you can get creative and figure out how to make everything work.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I love that. I think it's like regardless, it's just kind of reprioritizing what your priorities are. And I've seen the two extremes. I've seen people be like, absolutely no, I can't make it because my baby's on this schedule. And then other people that are go with the flow. And then other people that are like, you know what, today we're gonna maybe adjust and go this way. Maybe we're going to call in some other strategies, like as other people, whatever. Like it's really about kind of finding that happy medium that's going to work for you and for your
Yeah.
baby and working that out for yourself. So then where I was going with the first question was now, okay, so there's going to be people listening that don't have babies, right? And they may feel like they've missed the boat, or like you and I have talked about, like my 5-year-old does not like going to bed at all
Mhm.
whatsoever. And even last night, my 10-year-old, she came into my bedroom as I was getting ready to brush my teeth, and it was like 10 o'clock at night and she's still awake. And I'm like, why are you still awake? I'm like, are you on your phone or like on the iPad or the computer or something in your bedroom? Like, why are you still awake? And so my girls have a really hard time falling asleep. And so is this just for babies, or does your sleep training stuff work for other age ranges?
Yes, yes. Listen, my zone of genius is definitely that 0 to 5 year range. Because I get so many people reaching out to me with the 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds who are struggling in that department, and they think
Mhm.
that it's too late. And I want to assure you that it is not like teaching an old dog new tricks here. That we can absolutely be teaching your preschooler how to sleep like a champ. It just looks different
Yeah.
than what it would be involved with training an infant, because your 6-month old isn't talking in full sentences.
Yeah.
Your 6-month old isn't a, expert negotiator and, expert procrastinator, and one more story, one more song, but, mommy, I'm hungry. Mommy, I have to poo, right? There's none of that with a 6-month old. So it's a little bit more straightforward. But, with the toddlers and preschoolers, there's other layers, I would
Yeah.
say, that, we have to navigate. But at the end of the day, behavior is behavior, routines are routines, habits are habits, and routines and habits and behaviors can always be changed and modified when they're not working for you anymore.
Yeah.
And so there's no guilt in saying, listen, you know what we had for our kid when he was younger may have worked beautifully, or maybe it didn't, but, for
Mhm.
whatever reason, it just wasn't the right time for you to be able to address it head on. But now it's not working anymore, or it's really, really not working anymore. And now you're seeing, okay, I've hit rock bottom, or I am going to hit rock bottom very, very soon. He's also tired, and by that age, that's oftentimes when kids are starting school. And then
Yeah.
I'm getting a report from the teacher saying that, he's having meltdowns by the end of the day. Well, if he was up since 5 a.m., or if he was up till, 10 p.m. and then woke up, 2 more times at night, then that behavior totally makes sense. I mean, I might not be a 4-year-old. I'm a 35-year-old female, and I absolutely have meltdowns when I
Yeah.
don't have enough sleep during the day. And I'm perfectly capable of regulating my emotions. We can't expect the same sort of thing from a preschooler.
Yeah.
If that's the situation that you're finding yourself in, then we can create a plan that will take you through, step by step, exactly what you have to do. And that's what my program does. It takes people through step by step what they need to do and what they need to be addressing and fixing and tweaking, so that their babies, their toddlers, and their preschoolers can learn to consistently sleep through the night.
Yeah. Well, it's funny is like just this last week or so, my husband has had multiple things in the evening where he's been out during kind of like that bedtime sort of time frame. And one of my kids goes, "How come dad keeps leaving at nighttime? Does he not like doing bedtime anymore?" And I was like, "No, he does not like doing bedtime.
No.
It's a massive struggle over here in our house." So, um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
And that's
so
hard.
yeah.
And that's so hard because, like, you need your evening. I mean, I
Yes.
I really need my evenings, and it happens to be that my evenings, listen, my oldest is almost 10 now, right? So, there she's going to bed for 8:30. It's not like my evening can begin at 7 o'clock anymore. But if I had to deal with putting my kids to bed and not actually having any time to myself, I wouldn't be a functioning human, because
Mhm.
you need that time to recuperate, to regenerate, to have some, alone time, whether it's by yourself, with your husband, call up a friend, like, to engage in some form of self-care that is
Yeah.
literally impossible to do when the kids are around. As much you love your kids dearly, but you still need some time to yourself to rejuvenate, and you can't do that when you're spending hours getting them to sleep every night.
100%. I remember like sometimes at one point when my kids was up and I was like, "You do not understand, but I need this time." Like, if
Yeah.
you want me to be a sane mom and a happy mom and a nice mom, go to bed right
Yeah.
now. Like, I'm like, you
Yes.
don't understand it. So, for any of our listeners that are out there, can you give us just like one or two tips to help get their kids to sleep before we kind of wrap it up?
Yes, absolutely. So if you don't have a solid bedtime routine for your little ones, introduce one now. Whether or not your little one is 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years, bedtime routines are solid. And it's actually research based. There was a study that was done a little while ago where they enrolled a few hundred children in the 3 week to 5 year age range. And they split them into two, where one group was introduced was or the parents, I suppose, were told to introduce a bedtime routine to these
Mhm.
children, and then there was a control group where there was nothing that changed. And then within 3 weeks they found that the children that had a bedtime routine introduced to them were falling asleep more quickly, and they were waking up less at night, all
Mm,
because of
mhm.
that bedtime routine in comparison to the control group. Now, the bedtime routine does not have to be a long, drawn out, elaborate ordeal. I know when people hear bedtime routine, they think of like a 1 hour, circus performance
Yeah.
of like 25 stories and four bedtime songs. And no, no, that's not. First of all, if you don't want to bathe your kids every single night, you don't have to. Just gonna put that out there. A lot of people think that they're committing like a cardinal sin if they don't do a regular nightly bath. It is no problem. You do not have to do that if you don't want to. I definitely do not bathe my kids every single night because I'm lazy. It's
I
just
don't either.
I can't. It's not a priority of mine. If
Yeah.
you do want to bathe your kids every single night, that's totally fine as well. But it just wasn't what I ever did. But, so even on the non-bath days, I'll tell you what I do with my 2.5-year-old, right? This has basically been his routine since he was little. And it's just kind of evolved a little bit. Obviously it looks a little bit different now that he's a toddler, but it's the same sort of structure where I get him into his pajamas. He has a bottle. I read him a couple bedtime stories. We then go and say goodnight to everyone. He says goodnight to daddy, goodnight to his sisters. I take him upstairs. I get him into his sleep sack. I sing a goodnight song to him. I place him in his crib, tuck him in, say goodnight, leave the room. That's the bedtime routine.
Yeah.
But it's a strong routine because those cues that
Mhm.
are happening, throughout the pajamas, the bottle, the stories, the bedtime song, it's letting him know, like, okay, it is going to be time for me to go to sleep. I
Yeah.
can promise you that if I just said, all right, JJ, bedtime, let's go, he would be like, what? No, and sometimes when I've messed up or lost track of time and I try and expedite things, it backfires. He pushes back. He's like, no, story, mommy. Like, you're right. I'm wrong. Like, I didn't read a story. And
Yeah.
so having that kind of routine down pat is so crucial because it gives your little one that ample opportunity to begin winding down so that they're not being expected to go from, playing and interacting and engaging in some kind of activity to boom, now it's time to wind down and go to sleep. That's
Mhm.
when the routine isn't there or it's very, very short. That's oftentimes when parents really get pushback from
Yeah.
their kids. And then it ends up just prolonging the situation, even more.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I feel like bedtime routines is huge. It just sets up those habits. Like anything we do in life, when we have that habit in there, makes it so much easier. So, Eva,
Yeah.
I know you and I talked about hosting a webinar to go even deeper, right? We're going to do like a special
Yes.
training. So, for any of you out there that are listening that are like, heck yes, I need my kids to sleep. I need to work on this. Want to be able to sleep through the night. I need that time at the end of the day, all of those types of things. Eva and I are going to host a special training that's going to be coming up. We'll make sure that it's linked up in the show notes so you can get into there and get access to that. And otherwise, aside from that training, how else can people follow along with you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me online at mysleepingbaby.com. That's my website. You can follow me on Instagram and on Facebook, both at My Sleeping Baby.
Awesome. Awesome. So I know this episode is going to be so helpful for so many moms out there that are struggling. Like I think you and I talked about, I think like half of my audience has young kids at home. And so that makes a huge difference when you're not sleeping. And so if
Mhm.
just walking away, you get even just a little bit more sleep or a little bit more sanity in your life from this sleep, it'll be massive in so many big ways. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. And make sure you go over to the show notes and you grab that link so that you can join into our training that we're going to be hosting and kind of going in a little bit deeper, more tips, strategies, all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah,
Amazing. Thank you so
thanks.
much for having me. This was
Uh,
a blast.
Of course, it was so much fun.